I was standing in my garage at 6:30 in the morning, loading emergency medical supplies into my snowmobile trailer when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. The caller ID said it was the Whitefish Police Department dispatch, which immediately put me on alert. As the search and rescue coordinator for Flathead County, Montana, early morning calls usually meant someone was in serious trouble on the mountain. "This is Carter Davis," I answered, already mentally running through my equipment checklist. "Mr. Davis, this is Officer Martinez with Whitefish PD. We received a call about excessive noise coming from your property. The complainant says you've been running snowmobiles since 5 this morning and it's disturbing the peace." I blinked, completely caught off guard. "I'm sorry, what?" "I've been doing equipment checks for a potential rescue operation. We got word last night that 2 hikers didn't return from Glacier National Park, and I'm staging my gear in case we get the call to deploy." "I understand that, sir, but the complainant is quite insistent. She says this is a violation of your HOA rules and that she's already filed multiple complaints with the association." My jaw clenched. I had a pretty good idea who was behind this. "Let me guess. Patricia Whitmore from the HOA board." There was a pause. "I can't confirm that information, but someone from the Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association did contact us. They want us to issue you a citation." "Officer Martinez, with all due respect, I'm preparing for a search and rescue mission. People's lives could be at stake here. I've been a volunteer SAR coordinator for 8 years, and this is the first time anyone has complained about my equipment." "I hear you, Mr. Davis. Between you and me, I think this is ridiculous, but I have to follow up on the call. Can you maybe move your operation somewhere else or postpone until later in the day?" I looked at my watch. The temperature was already climbing, which meant avalanche conditions would worsen as the day progressed. If we got the call to search for those hikers, every minute would count. "I can't postpone a rescue operation because someone doesn't like the sound of a snowmobile. These machines need to be checked and ready to go at a moment's notice." "I understand. I'll note in my report that you're conducting official SAR preparations. But you might want to expect some pushback from your HOA." After I hung up, I stood there for a moment, absolutely dumbfounded. Patricia Whitmore had been a thorn in my side since she joined the HOA board 6 months ago. She was the textbook definition of someone with too much time and too much interest in everyone else's business. Last month, she'd sent me a violation notice because my trash cans were visible from the street on a non-collection day. Never mind that it was because I'd been out on a 3-day rescue mission and hadn't had time to bring them in. I went back to my equipment check, testing the pull cords on both snowmobiles and making sure the rescue sleds were properly secured. My property sat on the edge of Pine Ridge Estates, a development that had sprouted up 5 years ago in the foothills outside Whitefish. When I'd bought my house, it was because of the direct access to the backcountry, perfect for my work with search and rescue. The HOA rules had been reasonable back then, mostly focused on keeping properties maintained and preventing major eyesores. Then, Patricia moved in. She'd immediately volunteered for the HOA board, and within 2 months had convinced the other members to implement a whole new set of rules. Suddenly, we had restrictions on when we could water our lawns, what colors we could paint our front doors, and even what types of vehicles could be parked in driveways overnight. She tried to make me move my SAR trailer to a storage facility, but I'd fought back on that one, citing the need for rapid response capability. My phone rang again, and this time it was Jake Morrison, my second in command for the SAR team. "Carter, we just got the official call. The hikers are confirmed missing in the 2 Medicine area. We need to mobilize within the hour. Copy that. I'm already staged. Meet me at the trailhead in 45 minutes. I'll call the rest of the team. I spent the next 10 minutes making calls, coordinating our response team. We had 12 active volunteers, all trained in wilderness rescue, avalanche safety, and emergency medicine. This was what we did, what we trained countless hours for. The fact that someone had called the police over the noise of me preparing for this exact scenario was beyond infuriating. I was hitching my trailer to my truck when a silver Mercedes pulled into my driveway. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. Patricia Whitmore stepped out, wearing pristine white snow boots that had clearly never seen actual snow, a puffy designer jacket, and an expression that could curdle milk. "Mr. Davis, we need to talk about this morning's disturbance," she said, her voice sharp and nasal. "Patricia, I don't have time for this. I have a rescue operation to get to." "That's exactly what we need to discuss. This is the third time this month you've disturbed the entire neighborhood with your recreational vehicles." I turned to face her fully. Recreational vehicles. These are emergency response equipment. I'm the county SAR coordinator. 2 people are missing in the mountains right now, and I need to go find them. She crossed her arms. "I don't care what excuse you have." The HOA bylaws clearly state that no loud machinery can be operated before 7 a.m. on weekdays. You were running those machines at 5 this morning. I was doing equipment checks. That's not the same as operating them for recreation. The bylaws don't make that distinction. And furthermore, you have multiple vehicles and trailers stored on your property, which violates our aesthetic standards. I've already drafted a formal complaint that will be reviewed at next week's board meeting. We'll be imposing fines and potentially seeking legal action if you don't comply. My hands tightened on the trailer hitch. "You called 911 because I was preparing to save lives. Do you understand how insane that is? I called the police because you were breaking the law. What you do with your snowmobiles is irrelevant to the noise ordinance." "It's completely relevant. These machines save lives. Last year alone, our team conducted 37 rescue operations. We found lost hikers, evacuated injured climbers, and recovered people from avalanche zones. This isn't a hobby, Patricia. This is life and death work." She sniffed dismissively. "Then perhaps you should find a property that's better suited to your activities. Pine Ridge Estates is a residential community with standards. We can't have emergency sirens and engine noises disrupting our peaceful environment every time you feel like playing hero." The words hit me like a physical blow. Playing hero. I thought about the 17-year-old kid we'd pulled out of a crevasse last winter, hypothermic but alive. I thought about the elderly couple we'd found after they'd gotten disoriented on a snowshoe trail, hours away from freezing to death. Playing hero. "I need to go," I said, my voice tight. "People are counting on me. We'll be discussing this at the board meeting. I expect you to attend and address these violations." I climbed into my truck without responding and backed out of the driveway, leaving Patricia standing there with her arms crossed. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Team assembled. Weather window closing fast. We need to move." The drive to the 2 Medicine area took 40 minutes, and I used the time to push Patricia and her ridiculous complaints out of my mind. 2 hikers, both in their 20s according to the initial report, had set out yesterday morning for a day hike and never returned. Their car was still in the parking lot, and park rangers had found no sign of them on the main trails. That meant they'd either gone off trail or gotten into serious trouble. When I arrived at the staging area, my team was already geared up and waiting. Jake had laid out the topographic maps on the hood of his truck, marking potential search zones. The wind was picking up and dark clouds were rolling in from the west. "What's our search grid?" I asked, falling into the familiar rhythm of command. Rangers checked the main trail up to No Name Lake. No sign. We're thinking they might have tried to summit Sinapa Mountain, even though it's not recommended this time of year. I studied the map. Sinapa was a challenging peak in good conditions, borderline dangerous in winter. If they went up there and got caught in yesterday's wind, they could be anywhere on the eastern face. That's what I'm thinking. I've got teams ready to sweep sectors 1 through 4. We need to move fast, though. Temperature's dropping and that storm is coming in quick. We divided into 3 teams. I took the lead group with Jake and 2 others, heading up the steepest terrain where the hikers were most likely to be in trouble. The snowmobiles made quick work of the lower elevations, but once we hit the tree line, we had to proceed on foot with avalanche beacons and probes. 3 hours into the search, my radio crackled. "Carter, this is Team 2. We've got tracks heading northwest from the lake. Looks like 2 people, maybe 12 hours old. Copy that. Moving to your position." We found the tracks and followed them up a steep ridge. The wind had picked up significantly and visibility was dropping. These hikers had made a critical error in judgment, pushing into terrain they weren't equipped for. But that's why we were here. Another hour passed. My legs burned from the climb and ice had formed on my beard from my breath. Then I heard it, faint but unmistakable. A whistle. The universal distress signal. "Sound off," I called into the wind. "Search and rescue," the whistle came again, stronger now. We pushed forward, climbing over a snow-covered boulder field until we spotted them. 2 figures huddled in the lee of a rock outcropping, wrapped in an emergency blanket. They were alive but barely moving. "We've got them," I radioed to the other teams. "Northeast face, coordinates following." The next 2 hours were a blur of emergency medicine and careful extraction. Both hikers were hypothermic, exhausted, and one had a badly sprained ankle. We got them stabilized, loaded onto rescue sleds, and began the careful journey back down the mountain. By the time we reached the trailhead, the storm had fully moved in, dumping heavy snow that would have made the rescue impossible if we'd been even an hour later. The paramedics took over once we reached the ambulances, and I watched as the 2 hikers, a young man and woman, were loaded up for transport to the hospital. They'd be okay. Cold, battered, and probably traumatized, but alive. Jake clapped me on the shoulder. "Good work today, boss." That was a close one. Too close. If we'd delayed this morning, if I hadn't had the equipment ready to go. I didn't finish the sentence, but we both knew what I meant. If Patricia had succeeded in preventing me from preparing my gear that morning, if the police had actually shown up and forced me to stop, these 2 people might not have made it. It was almost 8 p.m. by the time I got home, exhausted and still cold to my core despite the truck's heater running full blast. My driveway was empty, thankfully, but there was an envelope taped to my front door. I already knew what it was before I opened it. "Notice of violation," it read in bold letters at the top. The document went on to detail multiple infractions: excessive noise before permitted hours, improper storage of recreational vehicles, conducting commercial activities in a residential zone. They were calling my SAR work commercial activities, and failure to maintain aesthetic standards. The fine listed at the bottom was $1,500, with additional daily penalties if I didn't comply within 30 days. I crumpled the notice in my fist and went inside. My dog, a German shepherd named Bella who'd been staying with my neighbor during the rescue, greeted me enthusiastically. I fed her, showered off the day's grime, and sat down with a beer to process everything that had happened. The notification chime on my phone showed a text from an unknown number. "This is Sarah Chen, reporter with the Whitefish pilot. I heard about the rescue today and that there was some kind of dispute with your HOA this morning. Would you be willing to talk about it?" I stared at the message for a long moment. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to handle this quietly and not make waves. But another part, the part that was still furious about Patricia calling the cops while I was preparing to save lives, wanted to tell the whole story. I typed back, "How did you hear about the HOA situation?" Her response came quickly. "Police dispatch logs are public record. I was following up on the rescue story when I saw the noise complaint call. Seemed like an interesting angle. Can I call you tomorrow? It's been a long day." "Absolutely. Congratulations on the successful rescue, by the way. Sleep well." I woke up the next morning to my phone ringing off the hook. Apparently, word about the rescue and the HOA complaint had already spread through the local community. I had messages from other SAR team members, friends, and even the county sheriff's office. The call that surprised me most was from Zara Anderson, an attorney who lived 3 streets over in Pine Ridge Estates. I'd met her a few times at neighborhood gatherings but didn't know her well. "Carter, I hope you don't mind me calling. I heard about what Patricia did yesterday and I wanted to offer my services." "Services?" "Legal representation. What the HOA is trying to do is not only morally reprehensible, it's likely illegal. Montana has specific protections for emergency services personnel, and there are federal laws that prevent HOAs from interfering with certain activities. I'd like to help you fight this." I sat down at my kitchen table. "I appreciate that, but I'm not sure I want to turn this into a legal battle. I just want to be able to do my job without someone calling the cops on me." "I understand, but Patricia isn't going to stop. She's already talking about forcing you to sell your house if you don't comply with her demands. I've seen her do this to other people in the neighborhood. She goes after anyone she perceives as not fitting her vision of what Pine Ridge should be. She's done this before. Oh yes. Last year, she drove out a retired veteran who ran a small woodworking business from his garage. Kept filing complaints until his fines were so high he couldn't afford to stay. And before that, she went after a woman who ran a home daycare. Patricia doesn't care about the rules. She cares about control." I thought about the 2 hikers from yesterday, about how close they'd come to dying on that mountain. Then I thought about Patricia's dismissive comment about me playing hero. What would fighting this involve? First, we'd respond to the HOA violation notice with a formal letter explaining why their complaints are invalid. Then, if they persist, we'd file a lawsuit claiming interference with emergency services and violation of your rights under Montana law. We might also look into whether Patricia's actions yesterday could be considered reckless endangerment, given that she attempted to prevent you from conducting a life-saving mission. Reckless endangerment. That seems extreme. She called the police to stop you from preparing for a rescue operation. Those hikers could have died if you'd been delayed. That's not just a HOA dispute, Carter. That's potentially criminal. I agreed to meet with Zara later that day to discuss options. In the meantime, I called Sarah Chen back and agreed to an interview. If Patricia wanted to make this public, I'd meet her head-on. The interview took place at a coffee shop in downtown Whitefish. Sarah was younger than I'd expected, maybe late 20s, with sharp eyes and a recorder she placed between us on the table. "So tell me what happened yesterday morning," she began. I walked her through everything, from the equipment check to the police call to Patricia's confrontation in my driveway. I explained what the search and rescue team does, how critical timing is in mountain rescues, and how close those hikers had come to not making it. And this isn't the first time the HOA has targeted you? Sarah asked. No. Patricia Whitmore has been filing complaints against me for months. It started small little things like trash cans and lawn maintenance. But it's escalated. She wants me to remove all my SAR equipment from my property, which would make it impossible for me to do my job effectively. Have you tried talking to the other board members? They seem afraid of her, honestly. Patricia is very aggressive, very demanding. She's convinced the board that property values will drop if we don't maintain her standards. Sarah made notes. I'd like to reach out to the HOA for comment, and I'd like to interview some of the other residents, see if anyone else has had issues with Miss Whitmore. The article ran 2 days later on the front page of the Whitefish Pilot. Local hero faces HOA backlash for saving lives. Sarah had done her homework, interviewing several other Pine Ridge residents who'd had run-ins with Patricia, and even getting a quote from one of the rescued hikers. If Mr. Davis hadn't been ready to go that morning, we would have died on that mountain, the hiker said. The fact that someone called the police on him for preparing to save us is unconscionable. The story exploded. It got picked up by the regional news, then by a few national outlets. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Local radio stations wanted interviews, national news programs wanted to do segments, and the county commissioner's office called to express their support. The HOA board, meanwhile, went into damage control mode. I received an email from the board president, a mild-mannered accountant named Dennis Harper, requesting an emergency meeting to discuss the situation. The meeting was held at the community center 3 days after the article ran. I arrived with Zara, and we found the small conference room packed with residents. Apparently, word had gotten out, and people wanted to see what would happen. Patricia sat at the head of the table, flanked by Dennis and 2 other board members. Her expression was pinched and defensive. "This meeting is supposed to be private HOA business," she said immediately. "We didn't authorize all these people to attend. HOA meetings are required to be open to all residents per your own bylaws," Zara said smoothly. Section 12, paragraph 3, Patricia's jaw tightened. "Fine. Let's get this over with. Mr. Davis, you've caused significant disruption to this community with your recent actions and statements to the press." "I didn't cause disruption," I replied. "I conducted a rescue operation and then defended myself when you filed frivolous complaints against me." "They weren't frivolous. You violated multiple HOA rules. Rules that shouldn't apply to emergency services operations. Montana Code Section 45-8-311 specifically exempts emergency services personnel from local noise ordinances when conducting official duties." Dennis cleared his throat. "Actually, I looked into that after the article ran. Carter's right. The HOA doesn't have the authority to restrict his search and rescue activities." Patricia whirled on him. "That's not what our lawyers said." "What lawyers?" Zara asked sharply. "Has the HOA board consulted with legal counsel about this matter?" Silence. Patricia looked flustered. "We discussed it. We know our rights." "You don't actually," Zara continued. "In addition to the state exemptions for emergency services, there are federal protections under the Service Members Civil Relief Act that extend to volunteer emergency personnel in some circumstances. What you've done could expose the HOA to significant legal liability." "This is ridiculous," Patricia snapped. "He's running loud machines at 5 in the morning, storing commercial equipment on residential property, and operating what amounts to a business out of his home. That's not what this community is for." An older man in the back of the room stood up. I recognized him as Frank Kowalski, a retired firefighter who lived on the other side of the development. "Patricia, with all due respect, you're way out of line here. Carter's been nothing but an asset to this community. Last winter, when we had that big storm, he personally dug out half the driveways on his street with his plow. And when the Martinez kid got lost in the woods behind the development, Carter found him in under 2 hours. "That's not the point," Patricia said. "Then what is the point?" Another resident called out. "Because from where we're sitting, it looks like you're harassing a volunteer who saves lives because you don't like the sound of his snowmobiles." The meeting devolved from there. More residents stood up to defend me and to air their own grievances against Patricia's heavy-handed approach to HOA enforcement. I learned that she'd filed over 40 violation notices in the past 6 months alone, far more than the previous board had issued in years. Finally, Dennis called for order. "I think it's clear we need to revisit some of our enforcement policies. Patricia, I'm going to recommend that we form a committee to review all recent violations and make sure we're being fair and consistent." "I won't be part of any committee that undermines the standards of this community," Patricia said coldly. "Then perhaps you should consider stepping down from the board," suggested one of the other members, a woman named Janet Torres. Patricia stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You'll regret this, all of you. This development is going to turn into a trashy, run-down mess without proper oversight, and don't come crying to me when your property values tank." She stormed out, leaving an awkward silence behind her. Dennis looked exhausted. "Carter, on behalf of the board, I apologize for how this situation was handled. We're going to formally withdraw all violation notices against you, and we'll be reviewing our bylaws to make sure they properly account for emergency services operations." "I appreciate that," I said. "I never wanted this to become a big thing. I just want to be able to do my job." The meeting adjourned, and several residents came up to shake my hand and offer their support. It felt good, but I also felt drained. This whole situation had taken up so much mental and emotional energy that should have been focused on SAR work. Zara walked out with me. "That went better than I expected. I really thought Patricia was going to dig in harder." "Something tells me she's not done," I said. I was right. 2 days later, I got a call from the county zoning office. Apparently, Patricia had filed a complaint claiming I was running a commercial business out of my home without proper permits. The zoning inspector, a harried-sounding woman named Gloria, explained that she was required to investigate. "I've got your address here, and it shows you've got a residential property in Pine Ridge Estates. Is it true you're operating a business there?" "I'm a volunteer search and rescue coordinator. I don't make any money from it." "You store equipment there?" "Yes, emergency equipment that I use for SAR operations." "How much equipment are we talking about?" I listed off the inventory. 2 snowmobiles, a rescue trailer, medical supplies, ropes and climbing gear, communication equipment, and various other tools of the trade. Gloria sighed. "Here's the thing. If you're storing commercial-grade equipment on residential property, even for volunteer work, you might technically be in violation of zoning regulations. Let me do some research and get back to you." I hung up and immediately called Zara. "Patricia's going after the zoning angle now." "Of course she is. Look, we need to get ahead of this. Let me make some calls." Over the next week, the situation got increasingly complicated. The zoning investigation revealed that there was indeed a gray area in the county regulations about storing emergency equipment on residential property. Meanwhile, Patricia had apparently been making the rounds at county commission meetings, pushing for stricter enforcement of residential zoning laws. The local media continued to follow the story, and it was taking on a life of its own. I did an interview with a national morning show via satellite, explaining the situation and the broader issues around HOA overreach. The segment went viral, and suddenly, I was getting messages of support from all over the country, as well as from other search and rescue volunteers who'd faced similar issues. But the attention also brought scrutiny. A local county commissioner named Brenda Morrison, who apparently was friends with Patricia, started making noise about how emergency volunteers needed to follow the same rules as everyone else. She proposed a new ordinance that would require all SAR volunteers to store their equipment at designated county facilities rather than at home. "That's insane," Jake said when I told him about it. "Half our response time advantage comes from having gear staged at our homes. If we have to drive to a central facility first, that could add 30 minutes or more to our deployment time." I know, but Morrison has support on the commission. She's framing it as a public safety issue, saying that having emergency equipment stored all over the county creates liability concerns. The county commission meeting where the proposed ordinance would be discussed was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Jake and I, along with a dozen other SAR volunteers, showed up in our team jackets to speak during public comment. The commission chambers were packed. Apparently, this had become a hot-button issue in the community, with people divided between supporting the SAR team and agreeing with Patricia's concerns about residential property standards. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the podium and looked at the 5 commissioners seated at the raised dais. My name is Carter Davis, and I've been a volunteer search and rescue coordinator for Flathead County for 8 years. In that time, my team has conducted 214 rescue operations. We've saved 47 lives directly and assisted in dozens more evacuations and emergency responses. I paused, making eye contact with each commissioner. The proposed ordinance to centralize SAR equipment storage would cripple our ability to respond quickly to emergencies. When we get a call, every minute matters. Having our gear staged at our homes means we can be on the road in under 15 minutes. If we have to drive to a central facility first, that becomes 45 minutes or more, depending on traffic and weather. Commissioner Morrison leaned forward. "Mr. Davis, we understand the importance of your work, but we also have to balance that against residential property standards and liability concerns. What if your equipment malfunctions and causes a fire? What if children in the neighborhood access your gear and get hurt?" "My equipment is stored securely and maintained to professional standards. I have liability insurance specifically for SAR operations, and in 8 years, there has never been a single incident related to my equipment storage." "But there could be," Morrison pressed. "And when it comes to residential neighborhoods, we have to think about the broader community, not just individual convenience." Jake stood up in the audience. "Commissioner, with all due respect, this isn't about convenience. Last month, we pulled a family of 4 out of an avalanche zone. We got to them in 18 minutes from the initial call. Under your proposed ordinance, we would have taken nearly an hour. Those people would have died." The meeting went on for another 2 hours, with passionate arguments on both sides. In the end, the commission voted to table the ordinance for further study, which was better than an outright approval but still left everything in limbo. As people filed out of the chambers, Patricia cornered me in the hallway. "You think you've won, but you haven't. I'm not going to stop until you're out of Pine Ridge Estates." "Why?" I asked, genuinely baffled. "What did I ever do to you? You represent everything that's wrong with this community. You think rules don't apply to you because you're doing something noble, but rules exist for a reason. If we let you break them, soon everyone will want special treatment and the whole neighborhood will fall apart." "I'm not breaking rules, Patricia. I'm doing emergency work that saves lives. You're disturbing the peace and lowering property values. That's all I need to know." She walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing in the hallway, stunned by the depth of her animosity. Zara appeared at my elbow. "She's unhinged, but we can use that." "What do you mean?" "I've been doing some digging into Patricia's background. She's been involved in HOA disputes in 3 different states over the past 10 years. In each case, she's pushed extreme enforcement actions that ended up costing the HOAs significant money in legal settlements. In Arizona, she was actually sued personally for harassment and lost. So she has a pattern." "Exactly. And if we can show that pattern, we can make the case that this isn't about HOA rules at all. It's about her personal vendetta and history of harassment." The legal strategy started to take shape. Zara filed a lawsuit against both Patricia personally and the Pine Ridge Estates HOA, claiming harassment, interference with emergency services, and violation of my civil rights. The suit asked for damages to cover the stress and time I'd spent dealing with the complaints, as well as an injunction preventing the HOA from interfering with my SAR work. Patricia responded by doubling down. She filed a countersuit claiming defamation and arguing that I was running a smear campaign against her. She also ramped up her enforcement actions across the entire development, filing violations against anyone who had spoken up in my defense at the community meeting. The neighborhood essentially split into 2 camps. Team Carter consisted of most of the residents who valued common sense and community over rigid rule enforcement. Team Patricia was smaller but vocal, mostly people who'd bought into her argument about property values and standards. Things came to a head 3 weeks later during what should have been a routine SAR training exercise. We'd scheduled a mock rescue scenario in the National Forest, just like we did every month to keep our skills sharp. I'd sent out the usual notification emails and posted on our public calendar, following all the protocols we'd established over the years. The training day arrived, and my team assembled at my house at 7 a.m. to caravan out to the training site. We were loading gear when 2 sheriff's deputies pulled up, followed by Patricia in her Mercedes. One of the deputies, a guy named Richards whom I knew from previous SAR operations, looked apologetic. "Carter, sorry about this, but we got a report of a large gathering at your residence without proper permits." "It's not a gathering, it's my SAR team heading out for training. We do this every month." Patricia stepped forward. "You have 15 vehicles parked on a residential street, dozens of people making noise, and you're conducting what amounts to a commercial operation. That requires permits." "It's not commercial, it's volunteer emergency services training." "That's a matter of interpretation," Patricia said smugly. Richards held up his hands. "Look, I don't want to make this a big thing, but technically Miss Whitmore has a point about the vehicles. You've got way more cars here than street parking allows." I wanted to scream. Instead, I took a deep breath. "Fine. Team, let's caravan to the staging area. We'll meet at the ranger station instead." As my team climbed into their vehicles and started pulling away, Patricia called out, "This isn't over, Carter. I've also filed complaints with the Forest Service about your unauthorized use of public lands for training." That was the last straw. I turned to face her fully. "You're trying to shut down search and rescue operations. You understand that, right? People die when we're not trained and ready. People's quality of life suffers when their neighborhoods are turned into industrial zones. Maybe you should have thought about that before you bought in a residential area." "I bought here because it gives me access to the backcountry, which I need for SAR work." "That was 5 years ago, before you showed up and started turning the neighborhood into your personal fiefdom." "How dare you?" "No, how dare you?" I interrupted. You called 911 on me while I was preparing to save lives. You filed false reports with the county. You're trying to shut down emergency services training. At what point do your actions cross the line from HOA enforcement into actual criminal behavior? Richard stepped between us. Okay, that's enough. Carter, head out to your training. Miss Whitmore, I think you've made your point. Let's all take a step back. The training session was a disaster. Half my team was distracted and angry about what had happened, and I couldn't focus on the exercises. We cut it short and headed home early, which meant we were behind on our certification requirements. That evening, I sat down with Zara to discuss next steps. She's actively interfering with public safety operations now. That's got to be illegal. It is, Zara confirmed. I've been researching Montana statute, and there are several laws about interfering with emergency services. The problem is proving intent. Patricia can claim she's just enforcing HOA rules and doesn't intend to disrupt SAR operations. Even though that's exactly what she's doing. But here's an interesting angle. I talked to a prosecutor friend of mine, and she thinks we might be able to get the county attorney's office interested in this case. If we can show that Patricia's actions have created a public safety hazard, they might pursue criminal charges. Would that actually work? It's a long shot, but worth trying, especially given that she's now gone after your training operations. That's not about noise in her neighborhood anymore. That's about actively preventing emergency services from maintaining readiness. We decided to reach out to the county attorney's office. In the meantime, I also contacted the sheriff directly, a gruff veteran named Tom Henderson who'd worked with our SAR team many times. Tom, I need advice. This HOA situation is spiraling out of control, and now it's affecting our ability to train and operate effectively. Tom listened as I explained everything that had happened, from the initial 911 call to Patricia's interference with our training. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. You know what really pisses me off about this? He finally said. Last year, when my deputies were searching for that missing kid from Columbia Falls, your team found him. 3 a.m. in a snowstorm, you guys were out there with your equipment. No complaints, no hesitation. And now this woman is trying to shut you down over snowmobile noise. That's about the size of it. Let me make some calls. I'm going to talk to the county attorney and see if we can't find a legal angle to shut this down. What Patricia's doing isn't just annoying, it's dangerous. 2 days later, I got a call from the county attorney's office asking me to come in for a meeting. I brought Zara, and we sat down with Assistant County Attorney Michael Foster, a sharp-looking man in his 40s. I've reviewed the information Sheriff Henderson provided, as well as the lawsuit filings and police reports, Foster began. I have to say, this is one of the more unusual cases I've seen, but I think there's potential criminal liability here. For Patricia, I asked. Potentially, yes. Montana Law Section 45-8-311 makes it a crime to knowingly interfere with emergency services operations. The question is whether Miss Whitmore's actions meet that threshold. She could argue she's just enforcing HOA rules and any interference is incidental. But she specifically called 911 to try to stop him from preparing for a rescue, Zara pointed out. And she's filed complaints with multiple agencies specifically targeting his SAR equipment and activities. That shows intent. Foster nodded slowly. It does. And the fact that she interfered with a training exercise pushes it even further. Let me talk to my boss, but I think we might be able to bring charges. At minimum, we could charge her with filing false police reports, which is a misdemeanor. But depending on how we frame the interference with emergency services, we might be able to go with something more serious. What would that look like? I asked. If we can prove that her actions created a substantial risk to public safety, we could potentially charge her with reckless endangerment. That's a felony. I sat back in my chair. This had escalated so far beyond what I'd ever imagined. I don't want to ruin her life. I just want her to stop interfering with my work. I understand that, and your restraint is admirable. But this isn't just about you anymore, Carter. If Miss Whitmore is allowed to continue interfering with search and rescue operations, people could die. The county has an obligation to protect emergency services from this kind of harassment. The meeting ended with Foster promising to review everything with the county attorney and get back to us within the week. In the meantime, I tried to return to some semblance of normal life. 2 days later at 11:30 at night, my SAR hotline rang. It was the dispatch center. Carter, we've got a situation. 2 snowmobilers went through the ice on Lake McDonald. One made it out, but the other is missing. We need water rescue capabilities immediately. I was out of bed and pulling on my gear within seconds. Lake McDonald was about 30 minutes from my house, and we had specialized equipment for ice rescue that no one else in the county had. I sent out the alert to my team and started loading my truck. I was backing the trailer out of my driveway when Patricia's porch lights came on across the street. She appeared in her doorway in a bathrobe, her phone already in her hand. "It's 11:30 at night," she shouted. "You can't be making this noise." "There's a person in the water at Lake McDonald. I'm responding to an emergency." "I don't care. This is a residential neighborhood with noise ordinances. I'm calling the police." Something inside me snapped. "Call them. Call whoever you want. But I'm going to save that person's life, and if you try to stop me, I'll have you arrested for interfering with emergency operations." I drove away, leaving her standing in her doorway. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, both from adrenaline and anger. Someone was dying in frigid water right now, and Patricia was worried about noise ordinances. The scene at Lake McDonald was chaotic. Park rangers had set up lights along the shore, and I could see the hole in the ice about 50 yards from the bank. The surviving snowmobiler, a young man, was wrapped in blankets and being treated for hypothermia by paramedics, but he was coherent enough to point out where his friend had gone through. "We were riding too close to the pressure ridge," he explained, his voice shaking. "The ice just gave way. Mike went under, and I couldn't reach him." Our team assembled quickly. Jake and I suited up in cold water immersion gear while other team members prepared the rescue boat and safety lines. The ice was unstable, which meant we couldn't just walk out to the hole. We had to use the boat to break through and create a path. It took 20 minutes to reach the hole where the snowmobiler had gone through. The water was black and impossibly cold, even through the protective suit. I went in first, diving down with a waterproof light and searching for any sign of the missing man. On my third dive, I found him. He was caught under the ice about 10 feet from the original hole, his snowmobile suit snagged on something below. I grabbed hold and pulled, fighting against the freezing water and my own body's desperate signals to surface. We got him up and into the boat. He wasn't breathing. Jake and I started CPR immediately while the rest of the team pulled us back to shore. Paramedics took over as soon as we reached the bank, working frantically to revive him. I stood there, dripping and shivering despite the thermal gear, watching the paramedics fight for this man's life. After 5 minutes, which felt like 5 hours, one of them looked up. "We've got a pulse. Faint, but it's there. Let's get him transported now." The ambulance screamed away into the night, and I finally let myself breathe. We'd done it. He might not make it, but we'd given him a chance. Jake draped a blanket over my shoulders. "Hell of a rescue, boss." "Team effort," I managed through chattering teeth. We were packing up the equipment when my phone rang. It was Officer Richards from earlier. "Carter, I'm really sorry about this, but dispatch got another complaint from Patricia Whitmore about noise at your residence. I know you're not there right now, but I wanted to give you a heads up. I'm at Lake McDonald. I just pulled a drowning victim out of the water." "I know. I heard it on the radio. That's why I'm calling. I wanted you to know that Sheriff Henderson personally called Miss Whitmore back and told her that if she filed one more frivolous complaint, she'd be charged with misuse of 911 services." He was pretty heated about it. "Good. Because I'm done being nice about this." When I finally got home at 3 in the morning, I was exhausted in every possible way. But I also felt a grim satisfaction. Patricia had tried to interfere with the rescue, and she'd failed. The county was finally taking her harassment seriously, and most importantly, we'd saved a life. The next day, I got a call from Michael Foster at the county attorney's office. "Carter, I wanted to let you know that we're moving forward with criminal charges against Patricia Whitmore. After last night's incident, where she attempted to interfere with an active water rescue, we have more than enough evidence to prove she's knowingly disrupting emergency services." "What are the charges?" "We're going with multiple counts: misuse of 911 services, filing false police reports, and interference with emergency services operations. The last one is a felony given the repeated nature of her actions and the serious risk to public safety." I should have felt vindicated, but mostly I just felt tired. "When will this happen?" "We'll be issuing a warrant today. She'll be arrested within the next 24 hours. I wanted you to know in case she tries to contact you or retaliate in any way." "Thank you. I appreciate you taking this seriously. The county takes protecting emergency services very seriously. What Miss Whitmore did was beyond the pale." Patricia was arrested the following morning. I wasn't there, but I heard about it from multiple neighbors who'd witnessed sheriff's deputies showing up at her house at 7 a.m. She was taken into custody without incident, processed at the county jail, and released on bail a few hours later. The arrest made news, of course. The story had already been getting regional attention, but now it went national. HOA Karen arrested for interfering with mountain rescue operations, read one headline. The TV news ran footage of Patricia being led out of her house in handcuffs, which felt somehow both satisfying and sad. The Pine Ridge Estates HOA board held an emergency meeting the day after Patricia's arrest. They voted unanimously to remove her from the board and to formally apologize to me for the harassment I'd endured. Dennis Harper, the board president, came to my house personally to deliver the news. "Carter, I'm so sorry we let this get so out of hand," he said, looking genuinely ashamed. "We should have stood up to Patricia months ago. We just kept hoping she'd calm down or that the situation would resolve itself. I appreciate the apology. I really do. But I need to know this won't happen again. I can't do my job if I'm constantly worried about HOA complaints." "It won't. We're rewriting the bylaws to specifically exempt emergency services operations from noise ordinances and equipment restrictions. And we're implementing new procedures for how violations are reported and investigated. No single board member will have the power to file complaints the way Patricia did. That's a good start. We're also formally dropping all violation notices against you and refunding any fines you paid. And if there's anything else we can do to make this right, please let us know." The man I'd pulled from Lake McDonald survived. His name was Mike Thornton, and he spent a week in the ICU recovering from severe hypothermia and near drowning. When he was finally released from the hospital, he came to find me at a local coffee shop. "Mr. Davis, I wanted to thank you in person," he said, shaking my hand firmly. The doctors said I wouldn't have made it if you'd been even 5 minutes later. You saved my life. I'm glad we got there in time. How are you feeling? Better every day. I've got some lingering effects from the hypothermia, but I'm alive. That's what matters. He paused. I also heard about the woman who tried to stop you from responding that night. Is it true she called the cops on you while you were heading out to rescue me? That's true. That's insane. I hope they throw the book at her. Patricia's trial was set for 3 months later. In the meantime, life slowly returned to normal. The HOA board implemented the new bylaws, and I no longer received violation notices. The county commission dropped the proposed ordinance about centralizing SAR equipment storage, and I was able to focus on what I did best, preparing for and conducting rescue operations. The SAR team conducted 6 more missions over the next 2 months. We found lost hikers, evacuated injured climbers, and assisted with a multi-vehicle accident in a remote area during a blizzard. Each time, I made sure to document our response times and the role that having equipment staged at home played in our success. This documentation would be important for Patricia's trial. When the trial date finally arrived, the courthouse was packed. Media from across the state had shown up, and there was even a crew from a national news network. Patricia arrived with a high-priced defense attorney, looking defiant despite the charges against her. The prosecution's case was straightforward. They presented the 911 call logs showing Patricia's repeated complaints, including the one made while I was responding to the Lake McDonald drowning. They showed the documentation of her interference with our training exercise. They brought in experts who testified about the critical nature of rapid response times in mountain rescue operations. I testified about the impact her actions had on my ability to do SAR work, and about the close calls we'd had during the period when she was most actively harassing me. The prosecutor asked me to describe the Lake McDonald rescue in detail. We pulled Mike Thornton from under the ice at 11:57 p.m., I explained. He'd been in the water for approximately 40 minutes by that point. If we'd arrived even 5 minutes later, he would have died. As it was touch and go whether we'd be able to revive him. And Miss Whitmore called 911 to complain about noise while you were responding to this emergency. Yes. She called at approximately 11:35 p.m., which was when I was loading my equipment to respond to the initial call. Officer Richards informed me of her complaint while we were still on scene at the lake. In your professional opinion, could a delay in response time have cost Mr. Thornton his life? Absolutely. In cold water immersion situations, every second counts. A delay of even a few minutes can mean the difference between life and death. Patricia's defense attorney tried to argue that she was simply enforcing HOA rules and had no way of knowing that her complaints would interfere with actual rescue operations. But the prosecution countered with evidence of her pattern of behavior, including the fact that she'd been explicitly told multiple times that I was a SAR coordinator and that my equipment was for emergency use. They also brought in testimony from other Pine Ridge residents about Patricia's aggressive enforcement tactics and her stated goal of forcing me out of the neighborhood. One neighbor testified that Patricia had told her directly, "I don't care what Carter Davis does for a living. Rules are rules, and he needs to follow them or leave." The trial lasted 3 days. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, the jury returned with their verdict. Patricia was found guilty on all counts: misuse of 911 services, filing false police reports, and felony interference with emergency services operations. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. At the sentencing hearing, The prosecutor recommended jail time, arguing that Patricia's actions had created a serious risk to public safety and that she'd shown no remorse for her behavior. Patricia's attorney argued for leniency, claiming that his client had simply been trying to maintain neighborhood standards and hadn't intended to interfere with legitimate emergency operations. He pointed out that she had no prior criminal record and that jail time would be excessive. The judge listened to both arguments, then turned to Patricia. "Miss Whitmore, do you have anything to say before I impose sentence?" Patricia stood, and for a moment I thought she might actually apologize. Instead, she said, "Your Honor, I maintain that I was in the right. Mr. Davis was violating HOA rules, and I had every right to report those violations. The fact that he happens to do volunteer work doesn't put him above the law." The judge's expression hardened. "Miss Whitmore, the jury has found you guilty of interfering with emergency services. Your actions could have cost lives. The fact that you still don't see the seriousness of what you did is deeply troubling." He sentenced her to 18 months in jail, with all but 90 days suspended, meaning she'd serve 3 months. She was also ordered to pay a $10,000 fine, complete 300 hours of community service, and was prohibited from serving on any HOA board for 5 years. Patricia's face went pale as the sentence was read. She'd clearly expected a slap on the wrist. Instead, she was being led away in handcuffs to begin her jail sentence immediately. As I walked out of the courthouse, I was swarmed by reporters asking for my reaction. I kept my statement brief. I'm satisfied that justice was served. My hope is that this sends a message that emergency services personnel need to be able to do their jobs without interference. Lives depend on it. That evening, I sat on my back deck with Bella, watching the sun set over the mountains. My phone had been ringing all day with calls from news outlets, well-wishers, and other SAR volunteers around the country who'd been following the case. But for now, I just wanted to enjoy the quiet. Jake stopped by with a 6-pack of beer. We sat together, not saying much, just decompressing after months of stress and conflict. "Think this will change anything?" Jake finally asked. "I mean, beyond just our situation." "I hope so. There are SAR teams all over the country dealing with similar issues. Neighbors who complain about noise, HOAs that don't understand what we do, local regulations that make it hard to stage equipment. Maybe this case will make people think twice before interfering with emergency services. And if it doesn't, then we keep fighting. Because this work is too important to let bureaucrats and busybodies shut us down." The civil lawsuit against the HOA was settled out of court a month later. The HOA's insurance company agreed to pay $75,000 in damages, and the HOA formally amended its bylaws to provide broad protections for emergency services operations. They also established a fund to help cover some of my equipment costs, which was a nice gesture even if it wasn't strictly necessary. Patricia served her 90 days in jail and then was released on probation. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd put her house up for sale and was planning to move to Florida. I felt a mixture of relief and sadness about that. Relief because it meant I wouldn't have to deal with her anymore, but sadness because it had all been so unnecessary. If she'd just been willing to listen, to understand what I was doing and why it mattered, none of this would have happened. The story had one more unexpected twist. About 6 months after the trial, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Patricia, postmarked from somewhere in Florida. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was surprisingly brief. "Mr. Davis, I've spent the past few months in therapy, working through some issues that my counselor says have been driving my behavior for years. I've come to realize that my need for control and order was hurting people, and for that I'm truly sorry. I can't undo what I did, but I want you to know that I understand now why what I did was wrong. I hope you can continue your important work without any further interference. Patricia Whitmore. I read the letter twice, then carefully folded it and put it in a drawer. It didn't change anything that had happened, but it was something. An acknowledgement, an apology, a small step toward redemption. Life settled into a new normal. The SAR team continued our regular operations, conducting rescues and training exercises without interference. The new HOA board was reasonable and supportive, even featuring our work in the neighborhood newsletter. The county commission passed a formal resolution recognizing the importance of volunteer emergency services and committing to protect those operations from unnecessary regulation. I gave talks at various HOA conferences and community meetings about the importance of understanding and supporting emergency services personnel in residential neighborhoods. The response was generally positive, though I occasionally encountered people who sympathized with Patricia's position about property standards and neighborhood aesthetics. To them, I always made the same point. Property values don't mean much if people are dying because emergency responders can't do their jobs. One evening, almost a year after the whole ordeal began, I was doing routine maintenance on my snowmobiles when Dennis Harper from the HOA board stopped by. "Wanted to give you a heads up," he said. "We've got a new family moving into Patricia's old house next week, young couple with 2 little kids. The husband asked specifically about you during the home tour. Apparently, he read about the case and wanted to know if you were still in the neighborhood." When the realtor said yes, he was thrilled. Said he felt safer knowing there was a SAR coordinator nearby. I smiled at that. "That's nice to hear. You've become something of a neighborhood celebrity, you know. People are proud to have you here. We even put it in our marketing materials now. Home to dedicated emergency services professionals. Probably increases property values, ironically enough." After Dennis left, I stood in my garage, surrounded by the equipment that had caused so much trouble. The snowmobiles, the rescue sleds, the ropes and medical gear. All of it was here, ready to go, ready to save lives at a moment's notice. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Training exercise this Saturday, weather permitting. Avalanche scenario. You in?" I texted back. "Absolutely. My place at 0700 for staging." And that was that. Life went on. People got lost in the mountains and we found them. Equipment needed maintenance and I maintained it. The work continued as it always had and always would because that's what we did. Sometimes I thought about Patricia and wondered if she'd found peace in Florida, if therapy had really helped her understand why she'd been so fixated on control. I hoped so, not for my sake but for hers. Life was too short to spend it angry at the world, trying to force everyone into neat little boxes of compliance. The mountains didn't care about HOA bylaws or noise ordinances. They were beautiful and dangerous and utterly indifferent to human concerns. When people ventured into that wilderness and found themselves in trouble, they needed help fast. They needed volunteers who were trained, equipped, and ready to respond immediately. That was my job, my calling, my purpose. And nobody, not the most aggressive HOA president or the most restrictive county ordinance, was going to stop me from doing it. The last rescue of that winter was memorable. A solo hiker had gone missing in the Bob Marshall Wilderness during a late-season storm. We searched for 2 days in brutal conditions before finally locating him, hypothermic and disoriented but alive. As we loaded him onto the rescue sled and began the long journey back to civilization, he looked up at me with tears freezing on his face. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for not giving up on me." "That's what we do," I told him. "We never give up, and we never would.